Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our
Warriors. And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a great show for you today with a great guest. So if you could, please do hit the like button and also, of course, subscribe to Tochnyi. It really helps us out. You can also check us out on Twitter and Blue Sky. We make some announcements there, so we appreciate people informing the people. So if you want to subscribe there. Check us out on our website at tochnyi.info. And if you guys have any questions, you can ask towards the end of the broadcast. So you can type them in chat whenever you want. So I will go ahead and jump right into the news. These are the main headlines as of November 23rd, 2025. First up, we have operations. Ukrainian forces carried out strikes on the Novokubishevsk oil facility in Russia's Samara region. The complex, run by Rosneft and ranked among Russia's 10 largest refining sites, handles roughly 8.8 million metric tons of crude each year. It produces gasoline, diesel, heavy fuel blends, and aviation-grade fuel used by high-speed aircraft. Ukrainian forces directed attacks at the facility, triggering blasts and a fire. Officials in Kyiv said that specialists are still determining the scale of the impact and noted that video recordings of the operation show the use of Ukraine's recently introduced Bars jet-powered drone. According to Militarny, this is the 6th time Ukraine has struck this refinery. An earlier operation on the night of October 18th forced a halt in production. That same night, Ukrainian forces also hit a storage site used by the Rubicon drone unit, as well as a pumping station for fuel and lubricants in the Donetsk-occupied territory. The General Staff also released findings from an assessment of a November 15th strike on the Ryazan refinery. The operation damaged 2 of the main crude processing installations, designated the ELOU AVT-4 and 6, and it also affected the storage tanks and sections of pipeline support structures. Ukrainian units dismantled the Selidove to Pokrovsk roadway in order to block Russian movements into the contested city from the northwest, according to the 7th Rapid Response Corps. Selidove, which was taken by Russian forces in 2024, once had a population of around 20,000. Since the occupation, most structures have been reduced to rubble, and civilians have been surviving without basic utilities or supplies. The military reported that an airstrike ruptured the roadway, cutting off a path that Russian troops had been using to push small vehicles toward the front line. Ukrainian forces already hit this stretch earlier. On November 11th, they disabled 5 motorcycles and 5 cars in and around the city, halting another attempted advance that achieved only limited gains for Russian units. Ukrainian troops are reinforcing other sectors with newly engineered defenses. Russian commanders, in turn, are pushing forward expendable groups tasked with removing the barriers. Russian forces are also attempting to take Mirnohrad, the paired settlement adjacent to Pokrovsk. Losing Mirnohrad would expose Pokrovsk to direct pressure and raises the risk of a broader Russian push across the entire region, a goal Moscow has pursued for over a decade. On November 14th, Ukrainian forces pulled down a newly placed Russian flag from the shattered Mirnohrad mine and dealt with the contingent that had raised it. Satellite imagery shows that 4 launchers and 2 core radar units of the S-400 system in Novorossiysk were eliminated, leaving the position that had raised it. Satellite imagery shows that 4 launchers and 2 core radar units of the S-400 system in Novorossiysk were eliminated, leaving the position unable to function. RBC Ukraine released the images of the damaged area. The outlet, citing its own contacts, reported that the site responsible for shielding Novorossiysk was hit by drones operated by the Ukrainian security services. The analytical group Cyberbaroshna stated that the operation used FP1. These are the main headlines. Security services. The analytical group Cyberbaroshna stated that the operation used FP-1 strike drones fitted with onboard cameras. According to the published assessment, the images confirm that 4 S-400 launchers on the grounds of a military unit assigned to the Kuban Red Banner Regiment were destroyed. A satellite image taken on November 11th, 2 days before the operation, showed 7 launchers in place, 2 of which were likely mock-ups. After the strike, 3 launchers remained, probably damaged, and 1 appears to be another mock-up, although the resolution of the imagery prevents a complete certainty. 2 major radar systems were also taken out, specifically the 96L6 early warning radar and the 92N6 radar used for target tracking. The 92N6 unit directs missile guidance and is considered the system's most vital component, so its loss disables the entire system. Sources indicated that about a dozen S-400 launchers are stationed within the compound and likely suffered damage as well. On the same night, Ukrainian forces also struck the Shesharis oil terminal in Novorossiysk. Ukraine's general staff stated that the targets were hit using Neptune cruise missiles along with several types of strike drones. Up next, we have economy and aid. During a press event in Paris, Ukraine's head of state announced that France is prepared to supply a substantial package of military equipment that includes 8 SAMP-T air defense units, 100 Rafale fighters, 6 launch platforms, and advanced radar systems. He noted that the formal agreement is being finalized to reinforce Ukraine's defensive capacity and emphasized that while some of the specifications may seem purely technical, they are critical additions from Ukraine's perspective. Also, Spain plans to deliver a new defense package for Ukraine valued at 615 million euros within the next month, according to an announcement made at a joint briefing in Madrid by Spain's head of government alongside the Ukrainian president. The Spanish leader explained that 300 million euros of this sum falls under an arrangement committing Spain to provide 1 billion euros in annual military support to Ukraine. He stated that 100 million euros will be used in the Pearl mechanism, which allows NATO members to purchase U.S. manufactured weapons for Ukraine, and that 215 million euros will be supplied via the EU's SAFE instrument to fund acquisitions of anti-drone systems and radar equipment, much of it produced by Spanish firms. Ukraine's president noted that the incoming assistance includes 40 missiles for the IRIS-T air defense system, stressing that such munitions are in extremely short supply during the winter months and that this provision will offer substantial reinforcement. He also stated that Ukraine and its partners are focusing on safeguarding civilians and, by extension, the broader European social model. Ukraine's president also thanked Spain for continuing help with the country's damaged energy sector, acknowledging an €8 million economic package directed in part toward energy needs after recent Russian strikes. The announcement was made as 5 bilateral documents were finalized in Madrid during the visit, signed in the presence of the Ukrainian president and Spain's head of government. Canada has delivered a new shipment of armored vehicles, missile components, and winter equipment to strengthen Ukraine's military, according to an updated entry on Ottawa's assistance portal for Ukraine. The package contains 25 M113 armored personnel carriers, along with roughly 75,000 spare parts drawn from the Canadian Armed Forces surplus stocks. Canada will also supply 125 AIM-7 air-to-air missile components and 38 LAU-7A launch units. This launcher system can be configured for use with other munitions of similar dimensions, including Sidewinder, ASRAAM, and IRIS-T missiles. Canada also allocated an additional $30 million Canadian dollars for cold weather gear. The winter supply set comprises more than 34,000 sleeping bags, 51,000 jackets, and about 9,000 pieces of insulated clothing, more than 22,000 pairs of military winter boots, and more than 78,000 pairs of wet weather winter boots. Ukraine's military intelligence says that Pyongyang has sharply reduced its artillery shipments to Russia in 2025 because its own reserve stocks are running low. The agency's deputy head told Reuters on November 14th that North Korean ammunition had allowed Russia to keep up its rate of fire in 2024, but the deliveries this year had fallen significantly in both volume and reliability. According to the military intelligence official, North Korea supplied around 6.5 million shells in 2023 as it sought closer alignment with Moscow after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Intelligence tracking showed no shipments in September and only limited movement in October. He added that roughly half the shells that did arrive were in such poor condition that Russia had to send them to a domestic plant for refurbishment. North Korea also started manufacturing small, short-range FPV drones and larger medium-range models, although intelligence services have not disclosed their production figures. Ukraine and Greece have formalized an agreement to bring U.S. liquefied natural gas into Ukraine during the first quarter of 2026 as part of Kyiv's effort to secure enough energy supplies as Russian strikes continue damaging critical facilities. The announcement was made during a joint briefing in Athens by Ukraine's president alongside Greece's head of government. Greece's head of government explained that U.S. LNG will be moved through the vertical corridor, starting in Alexandroupolis terminal and continuing through Bulgaria, Romania, and Moldova before reaching Odessa. He stated that this agreement positions Greece as a new European entry point for American gas. Ukraine's president thanked international partners, especially the United States, for enabling the project and emphasized that Greece hosts infrastructure capable of channeling the supplies to Ukraine. The deal covers both immediate deliveries planned for early 2026 and longer-term cooperation aimed at reinforcing Ukraine's energy resilience. Greece's state gas operator DEPA said that it signed a letter of intent with Ukraine's state energy company Naftogaz concerning gas deliveries for the winter period from December of 2025 to March of 2026. Up next, we have international relations. Boy, it's a lot. The president of Belarus has approved the release of 31 Ukrainians who had been held in Belarusian prisons, and their return to Ukraine is already underway, according to his press secretary. She said that the decision followed an understanding reached between Belarus and the U.S. president after Ukraine requested assistance in the matter. Ukrainian authorities confirmed that the handover occurred, according to the country's coordination body handling detainee matters. The group of returnees ranges in age from 18 to 58. Several have serious medical conditions, including cancer, and had received sentences of between 2 and 11 years in Belarus. The coordination body thanked the state institutions involved for arranging the transfer. Belarusian officials did not detail the charges that these individuals were accused of. Minsk, like Moscow, has detained both its own citizens and foreigners for acts linked to expression and dissent, extending beyond those involved in the 2020 demonstrations in Belarus. A Belarusian rights organization reported that at least 1,184 people it classifies as political detainees remain in custody as of November 22nd. There they face harsh treatment, discriminatory conditions, and prolonged isolation. The leader of Belarus has approved several group releases in recent months, including the release of the spouse of a prominent opposition figure in June, as he seeks to improve ties with Western countries. A former Reform UK figure in Wales, Nathan Gill, aged 52, has received a 10.5-year prison sentence for accepting payments to issue statements supportive of Russia. He admitted to receiving money from Oleg Voloshin, a former Ukrainian lawmaker associated with Viktor Medvedchuk, a close associate of Vladimir Putin. Reform UK is known as a right-wing populist party, and Moscow routinely backs or finances far-right and far-left groups in Europe to amplify its narratives and soften perceptions of its actions. The ruling prompted demands for a broad inquiry into Russian influence in the country. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey described Gill as someone who had betrayed trust and questioned where his allegiances lay. The Prime Minister accused Gill of compromising national interests and urged Nigel Farage to examine any links between Reform UK and Russia. Reform UK called Gill's conduct disgraceful, disloyal, and beyond forgiveness, and said that it welcomed the sentence. Farage stated that he knew nothing about the arrangement and labeled Gill a rogue actor. Gill received the payments while serving as a member in the European Parliament between December 2018 and July of 2019. Investigators discovered coded exchanges referring to holiday presents and postcards that were actually references to money transfers. Prosecutors said that he received about £40,000. He already entered guilty pleas in March to 8 bribery charges. Gill then used his position to echo pro-Russian talking points in the European Parliament and contributed articles to media outlets aligned with the Kremlin. He also gave interviews defending Ukrainian television channels tied to Medvedchuk, who faced charges of acting against Ukraine's interests. He also helped organize an event in Strasbourg to advance a supposed peace initiative for the Donbass region, which was already partly under Russian control. The Russian president publicly commended the event the following day. The scheme came into focus after police reviewed Gill's phone when he was stopped at Manchester Airport in September of 2021 while preparing to travel to Russia for a conference and to observe elections. Investigators found coded messages discussing payments and attempts to enlist other members of the European Parliament to repeat Moscow's talking points on Ukraine. Gill messaged that he could bring several colleagues when asked to recruit others. Messaging records showed that the arrangement became more routine over time. Voloshin offered specific sums, telling Gill that he could expect £5,000. Prosecutors said Gill managed to involve several members of the European Parliament from the UK, Germany, and France to speak to various media outlets. Voloshin told Gill that he would secure at least £5,000 if Gill brought in 3 or 4 additional participants. The judge noted that there was no evidence that these colleagues were aware of the payments. Police stated that the case illustrates a broader pattern of Russian activity. Investigators are still examining whether other individuals committed offenses. A senior Metropolitan Police official said that Gill was an unusually eager participant in the bribery scheme and linked the case to other Russian operations in Britain, including the Salisbury incident and an arson attack in London in 2024. He said that Russia presents a significant security challenge moving forward. The Prime Minister of Poland stated on November 17th that a stretch of railway between Warsaw and Lublin had been destroyed in what he described as an unprecedented act meant to strike a train. He emphasized that the line is essential for transporting assistance to Ukraine. Local police said that a train driver reported the damage to a section of track on November 16th near the village of Mika, roughly 130 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. On November 18th, a spokesperson for Poland's security services said that evidence strongly suggested involvement by Russian intelligence, arguing that the aim was to unsettle the public. Addressing Parliament, the Prime Minister said investigators had identified 2 Ukrainian nationals as suspects and alleged that they were cooperating with Russian intelligence. Both reportedly crossed into Belarus soon after the explosion. One of them had previously been convicted in Lviv in May for carrying out sabotage in Ukraine, while another comes from the Donbas region. He warned that similar covert actions across Europe are becoming more frequent and said that this is especially hazardous for Poland, given the strain of hosting more than 1 million Ukrainians who fled Russia's invasion. Ukraine's foreign ministry said Moscow deliberately recruits Ukrainian passport holders for covert acts and attempts to shift responsibility away from itself. Warsaw intends to pursue the detention and extradition of the suspects and will raise the matter with both Belarus and Russia. Polish authorities say that Russia has repeatedly tried to recruit Ukrainians for operations in Poland aimed at damaging key infrastructure. Security services have been reporting an increase in such activity over recent years, often linking it to Russian or Belarusian agencies. Poland's foreign minister described the recent rail attack as a state-directed act designed to cause loss of life and announced the closure of the last remaining Russian consulate in the country located in Gdansk. He indicated that further measures may follow. Poland has already closed Russian consulates in Krakow and Poznan, although the embassy in Warsaw remains open. In response, Russia's foreign ministry said that it would scale back Poland's diplomatic and consular presence in Russia, and a Kremlin spokesperson said relations had deteriorated so far that Poland seemed intent on reducing formal contacts to almost nothing. The security services said they were moving forward with arrests connected to the case. By Wednesday morning, 4 people had been detained. The Ukrainian president said that he would provide full access to relevant information and that both countries would create a joint working group to prevent further incidents. He said both administrations share the same assessment, namely that the evidence points to Russian security services involvement, and likened the events in Poland to the daily covert attacks happening inside Ukraine. At a press briefing in Warsaw, the chief of the general staff said that the long winter nights during the upcoming holiday period could be seen by Russia as an opportune moment to intensify such activity. He said Poland needs to prevent this and to prepare for a wide spectrum of possible scenarios. The defense minister announced that the military is developing Operation Horizon, a plan to deploy 10,000 troops to guard key infrastructure and raise security levels nationwide. And last item this week, boy are people talking about it. Ukraine's national security chief said on November 22nd that senior delegations from Kyiv and Washington will meet in Switzerland in the coming days to discuss a new peace initiative proposed this week by the White House. A presidential decree released the same day said that additional international partners, as well as a Russian delegation, will join the talks. 9 Ukrainian officials are slated to take part, including the head of the presidential office and the country's military intelligence chief. CNN reported that the U.S. group will include the U.S. Secretary of State and a special envoy. According to AFP, representatives from the UK, France, and Germany will also attend, with one European official stating that advisors from the 3 countries would travel to Geneva on Sunday to meet with their US and Ukrainian counterparts. Another source confirmed that discussions would take place among the United States, the 3 European states, and Ukraine. The initiative is part of a renewed push by Washington to force an end to the war, centered on demands that Ukraine cede the entire Donbas region and accept limits on the size of its armed forces in exchange for a Western security guarantee. Washington has set a November 27th deadline for Kyiv to respond, and there have been some warnings that continued U.S. backing hinges on acceptance of the proposal. Ukraine's security chief wrote that Kyiv enters the process with a firm grasp of its interests and views talks as another step in the dialogue that has been ongoing in recent days to define the way forward. Umarov faced some accusations in Ukraine that he altered elements of the proposal in a way that could constitute misconduct, allegations that he denied, stating that he neither approved or changed any part of the plan. A senior U.S. official, speaking anonymously to the Kyiv Independent, rejected his denial, saying the proposal was drafted after consultations with a senior member of Ukraine's leadership who agreed to most of its provisions, amended several points, and then presented it to the Ukrainian president. Umarov stated that Kyiv values Washington's readiness to engage and will continue to act in a responsible and consistent manner in line with national security requirements. And that's it for the main.
Yeah, and the next segment, that will be me. Hello guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. We are starting with a nice little story I made public on Monday. The German government has financed the renovation of the rehabilitation department of the Mykolaiv City Hospital. in total 21 rooms, including sanitary rooms, corridors, technical areas, and more, with a total area of around 348 square meters, have been renovated to meet modern accessibility standards. And already last but not least, during Rheinmetall's Capital Markets Day presentation on Tuesday, CEO Armin Pappberger announced that 4 Skynex air defense systems are currently in use in Ukraine. Given that only 4 have ever been contracted by the German government, at least as far as we know, this means that the last 2 publicly known pledged systems have now been delivered. According to Pappberger, the Skynex systems are being used in western Ukraine to protect Ukrainian power plants. And that's already it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you. So now we'll move to Stanimir's segment about his updates on the Russian economy. Stanimir, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And again, we're starting a bit with the Russian fuel news, though there's not so much this week. So there was a shortage in Novosibirsk. That one continued. In Buryatia, there was also a shortage, and in the Sakhalin region as well as in Moscow region. We also had the leader of the party Just Russia, which is a party in the Russian State Duma, asked the Russian Prime Minister to freeze the prices of gasoline until October 1st, 2026. So in terms of prices, they're still going up in most regions of Russia, even though they only report the official Россtat or subsidiaries of Россtat as the prices increases. But overall price increases are still ongoing in a lot of Russian regions. And according to the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, provided gas stations can get gasoline from Spimex, where the market right now is very limited in terms of independent gas station operators, they will have a slight profit if they sell A92 gasoline in the western part of Russia. And the profit is estimated at 0.2 rubles per liter after all their costs are taken into account. However, for the remaining part of Russia, they're still operating at a loss, even if they get the low prices from Spimex. A95 will also be sold at a loss, even if you got it from Spimex. The problem, however, remains that even if you buy a certain lot from Spimex of fuel, you're not going to actually receive it physically for at least a few months. And for Central Russia and the Russian Far East, the problem has been that they cannot get fuel deliveries from depots, even though they pay them in advance. So currently, gas stations are operating with fuel they bought in September. So that's 2 months of delay, and they will only get to fuel from November that's supposed to be cheaper if you look at Spimex prices in late December, even if they, and that means that if they're lucky to get it, because again, the delays have been over 2 months so far when it comes to fuel deliveries. So that's it for this week for Russian fuel news. The other thing we have this week is the Russian utilities outages. This week we had a little less than last year, but if you even out the reporting from in terms of numbers of outages from the previous year and this year, we're generally at the same level, roughly, if you average out for the last 4 weeks. And the interesting thing this week is, again, we have an example of there being a lot more outages than I can catch, with Vologda region, for example, having 21 outages when it comes to drinking water, and I was able to find in local news only 5. So have that in mind in terms of how much more outages are not caught by my map every week, because some regions even don't report outages completely. Also, what we had is for the second week in a row, when I found a story for the repairs of pipes, they found out that the pipes they were replacing were actually wooden ones that were more than 100 years old. So they were actually doing archaeology rather than repairing the water supply. In this case, I didn't include the story, but I thought it was interesting enough to bring it up on air and to add it to the thread that you can see with Russian utilities outages. And if Erlend can move to the next slide, we can see the actual outages this year versus last year. So we started high, then we had a lower week in the second week. In the third week, we had one of the highest reported number of outages ever. And this week, we're a bit lower than the last year's week 4. So this is currently week 4, and I'll continue to update this this chart as we go on. The only thing that I will change is I will move to the weeks of the year rather than the weeks of the season that's heating it, the heating season, that is. And that's it for this part. Now, when it comes to stories from Russia, for the last few days of this week, we had the big story being the discounts on online marketplaces, which you can get with the loyalty programs of smaller banks and banks that are operated by their online marketplaces. So for those who don't know, Ozone and Wildberries have their own banks to facilitate payments. And the big banks, Sberbank, VTB, T-Bank, which is formerly Tinkoff Bank, Alfa Bank, and Sovcombank, which are Russia's 5 largest banks, wrote to the Russian Duma to ask it to ban the practice for smaller banks to have loyalty programs with their bank cards that will lower the prices on online marketplaces. In this case, even the CEO of Sberbank, Herman Gref, made some comments saying that online marketplaces, because of this scheme, are paying 1.5 trillion rubles less in taxes every year. Nabiullina suggested banning online marketplaces altogether from owning their banks. That's a big threat when it comes from the head of the central bank. And the finance minister, Siluanu, spoke out saying that there's no compliance with the tax code when it comes to online marketplaces. So I think for the next few weeks, the big boogeyman in Russia when it comes to domestic issues is going to be Russian online marketplaces providing cheaper goods to consumers. And again, what Russian online marketplaces said is that if they remove these discounts, in the end, the people who will suffer will be Russian consumers, but that doesn't seem to be something that the big banks and Russian officials factor into this equation. We also had news that the Russian Far East Railway had an 11% reduction in container traffic for the first 10 months of the year. And in terms of loaded containers, the decrease was 12.8% to 850,000 TEU units. And we also had a lot of news when it comes to Russian oil. So with the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, Russian seaborne oil exports for the period from the November of the 10th to 16th dropped by 12.7% to 291,000 tons per day, which is the biggest drop since, I think, 2020. And the largest contraction for that period came from Primorsk, which dropped its exports by 73.2%. On top of that, expect following week to be even worse because Novorossiysk's terminal has been knocked out for a while, and it's still not shipping as far as I'm aware. We also had the Indian oil company Reliance saying that from November 20th, they had stopped buying Russian oil altogether. And it previously had a long-term contract for 500,000 barrels of Russian oil per day. China has also almost stopped buying Russian oil. It decreased its purchases in November by 500 to 800,000 barrels per day, which is roughly 2/3 of the volume that was shipped. And Russian raw oil, because of all this news, dropped to $46.61 per barrel, at which point I think they're barely making any profit because the taxes are also so low. We also had Russia's aluminum giant Rusal close down one of its big factories. It closed down Russia's largest silicon manufacturer called Silicon in Irkutsk. This is due to a global surplus of silicon and an increase of imports from China, which are being sold on the Russian market at dumping prices. And it's also going to reduce its production at its Sverdlovsk plant for silicon again by a significant amount. Initially, they planned to reduce it by only 35%, but then they decided to just close one of the two factories altogether and reduce the production of the second plant. We also had news that the Russian air transportation companies, so things like Volga, Dnieper, that are focusing on air transport of cargo, they might disappear as a market in Russia. So the entire sector might vanish in 3 to 5 years because their planes are fairly obsolete by now in terms of their age. There's a shortage of trained staff and spare parts. And there is a higher cost of repairs because of this, and the foreign competition gets tougher. For example, they mentioned that Chinese air transportation companies have 50% subsidies from the budget, whereas the entire subsidy for the Russian air freight transportation sector is around 2 billion or 2.9 billion rubles. By comparison, the passenger transportation side of Russian aviation, civil aviation that is, has subsidies of around 100 billion rubles per year. So the other thing that we found from this story is that they have only one simulator for Il-76, which is in Ulyanovsk. This is the only one for both Russia and foreign partners that are buying the Il-76, and they also can't buy, the civilian companies can't buy Il-76s because the Russian military is buying all the planes that are being built, even though they've managed to slightly increase production. So that sector might collapse in the next 3 to 5 years entirely. When it comes to banking, we had just news about the issuance of credit cards. It grew to the highest number of 2025 in October. It grew to 1.4 million almost, up from 1.33 million in September. However, the limits on the credit cards dropped to 100,500 rubles, which is a very low level. They're back to the levels of 2022, and suddenly they dropped significantly over the last 2 months. When it comes to metals, we had a big story about the Russian steel market, and it still remains in deep crisis. So it's not going to probably recover until 2026, according to analysts, and 2027, according to insiders like Severstal. Production of flat steel products has dropped by 9% for the first 9 months of 2025, and the consumption of such flat steel products has dropped by 13%. And Severstal expects that consumption for 2025 of steel altogether will drop by 14 to 15% by the end of the year, and that this will continue in 2026. So the Russian steel market continues to be in a deep, deep hole and hasn't recovered. It's also not being held by Chinese competition, which is severely limiting its global reach. When it comes to Russian coal, for the first week of November 2025, Russian 6,000 kilocalorie coal in Handymax ships raised its cost to $104 to $105 per ton, which is a big improvement for the Russian coal industry, as it's currently has at least 5 of the companies in the Kuzbass are not able to pay salaries of their employees. And for 5,500 kilocalories, the Russian coal price rose by 4.5% to $80 per ton. So this is a big improvement for them, but I think still a lot of companies will not be able to manage that, because shipping to China requires that you get priority shipping via railway to the Far East to have a better chance of selling the coal there. When it comes to the gas and oil sector, we have mostly news from Novatek, which for the first for the period that's the warm weather that allows for the Northern Sea path to be used from the Yamal LNG, it managed to ship only 1.96 million tons of LNG, which is 18% less than in 2024 to China. And from the Arctic LNG, which is sanctioned, it, however, managed to ship 840,000 tons. The reason it's being able to ship from Arctic LNG, which also links to sanctions that were enforced, I think, by the UK on one of the terminals that receives this LNG, is because Novatek lowered the price by 30 to 40% just to ship something from the project, which has been sanctioned altogether. So because of that drop, they managed to ship 14 shipments to China, but it resulted, like I said, in sanctions against one of the Chinese terminals. When it comes to the construction market, when it comes to warehouse commissioning in Russia for 2025, it's expected to rise by 71% to 7 million square meters. And for 2026, the plan is to produce 14 million square meters of warehousing, but the expectation of experts in the market is that half of this volume will actually be postponed and not be built in 2026. So they'll have similar numbers for 2026 as 2025. However, when it comes to actual sales on the real estate market for warehouses in 2025, they reached only 4.1 million square meters, which is 28% lower than in 2024. And demand has decreased since 2024 from the heightened level to a more moderate one in terms of looking for warehouses in terms of all of Russia, because there's already a surplus of warehouses within Russia for logistics companies. When it comes to interesting data points for this week, the net profit of Russia's largest leasing company, I think, is Erlend. It, for the first 9 months of the year, dropped from 11.3 billion rubles to 2.9 billion rubles, and the leasing portfolio decreased by 28% to 183.2 billion rubles, with reserves costs rising to 19.2 billion rubles. And overall, for the period of the first 9 months of 2025, leasing companies in Russia, the 15 largest ones, managed to have only 14.2 billion rubles in profit. Only 3 companies showed growth in terms of profits. 4 companies recorded new losses, and the rest of the companies from the list saw their profits actually decrease for the first 9 months of 2023. Another interesting story is that Sberbank plans to cut 20% of its employees that their AI systems have deemed as ineffective. So, in Russia, the dystopian future is coming a bit quickly to reality. And in terms of the sales of Russian construction equipment for the first 9 months of the year, they dropped by 41.3%. However, they've not dropped by so much in September, where the drop was 25.7%, but the market still doesn't expect a recovery this year or next year. And we had news about the sales of ice cream this year. So for the summer months, from May to September, actual physical volumes dropped by 7.1%. But in terms of rubles, the earnings for the companies that sold ice cream rose by 6.7%. And this is another example that prices are going up by much more than the official inflation figures. We have one more story in terms of interesting data points. For 2025, Russia's biggest car maker, Outages, expects to sell only 370,000 cars, including 20,000 cars outside of Russia. It usually exports outside of Russia 19 to 21,000 cars, so this is in line with previous years. A bit lower because in 2024 they sold 1,000 more cars. And in terms of overall sales in 2024, they were 23.7% higher at 459,000 cars. So the auto market continues to be in a decline despite their attempts to revive it with new recycling fees on foreign imports in the attempt to aid Lada to sell more cars domestically. They haven't been successful in that. They estimate that the entire new car market for 2025 will be 1.4 million cars versus 1.57 million in 2024. Now we have the inflation and debt part of the reporting. For the period of the 11th to the 17th of November, Russian official inflation, according to Rosstat, was 0.11%. For November 2025, the inflation so far has been 0.26%. That's for the first half of the month. And the inflation for the year so far is 5.43%. Again, I have to say that some things are ignored, like fuel prices. And there are also other shenanigans that they removed. They lowered the inflation for October in their revision from 0.84% to 0.5% because they said that as part of that, their analysis, foreign trips, tourist trips outside of Russia were cheaper by 13.7%. And again, this is a way for them to massage the data to make it seem like the inflation is lower than it actually is. They had 2 auctions this week. The first one managed to sell 20.4 billion rubles. It was a fixed coupon issue at the yield of 14.75%. So we're back to the 14% in terms of Russian debt. And the second one managed to sell 131.4 billion rubles. And this time the yield was higher at 14.91%, but we're back to, like I said, yields being below 15%. And I think that's it for me for this week in terms of Russian business news.
Well, thank you, Stanimir. As always, you'll keep us appraised each week about what's going on with the Russian economy. So I think we got just a couple minutes, Mr. Erlend, before we're joined by our guest. Since we need to talk about something, should we talk about the goings on of late?
I see that the guest is backstage, so I think we can jump
that's
to
fine.
the guest and maybe take the discussion afterwards and include him, maybe.
Yeah, it's up to you. I thought we had 5 minutes we had to buy ourselves, but yeah, if you're ready to start the interview now, go ahead.
Yep. So I welcome, I'm very pleased to welcome my name brother, Erlend Bollman Bjørtvedt. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Alan.
I just have to say that I have been trying, I don't know if Erlend knows this, but I've been trying to get him on Tochnyi for a long time. Since the first time I heard you on the Norwegian podcast Ukraina-podden, my friend, our friend, common friend, Jørn, promised me make sure that you would come to our stream, but eventually I was lucky enough to meet you at a dinner and got in personal contact with you. So I'm very happy and pleased that you're here with us.
Thank you.
I want to introduce you as a sanction evasion hunter. Alan has also recently published a very important report, in my opinion, with the Norwegian Foreign Policy Institute, NUPI. The title in English is Two Scenarios, or I translated it because it's still not released in English, but will be soon. Two scenarios for the war in Ukraine. What do they mean for Europe, and what will it cost? So I'm going to give you the word. Please, who are you, and what are you doing with regards to Ukraine and the Russian aggression?
Thanks a lot, Erlend, and thank you for inviting me. As you said, I've been visiting the Ukraine pod in Norway several times. It was interesting to hear part of the previous walkthrough you had in the internal part about Russia's economy. This is one of the issues I've been working quite a lot on, and in many ways, probably in the same way as you in your network of working, combination of open source intelligence and econometrical analysis, basically. So I have been working, diving deep into Russia's trade for about almost 4 years. I started summer 22 doing that. And what I've been doing over those last 3.5 years is basically estimating shadow trade, estimating the actual import and exports of Russia, comparing them with the data of the central bank, but doing that in a granular way, basically per trade partner per country. And what I've been doing, I've been basically estimated the shadow trade between Russia and all countries in the world, actually, and via third countries, via intermediaries such as Kazakhstan, Belarus, etc. That means that we have a kind of a matrix data set of 500,000 data points, and we have tracked trade since 2019, and we can, with help of that, we can basically say quite a lot about how does Russia's trade perform. Do they export less or more? Do they import less or more? Which commodities do they import? Which do they get? Which Western goods via which country, etc., monthly? And in that way, we're also able to pinpoint to EU legislators, experts, which sanctions work and which do not. So we have basically been quite a lot kind of pinpointing holes in the sanction net, and we have helped many governments understand which reforms had effect, etc. I have uploaded a presentation. I've uploaded two slides. So if possible,
Yeah, I will.
You may just kind of only 2 slides. Less is more. But I will say a little bit about first the study that you mentioned recently, and then I will say a little bit more about this work on sanctions. But if we can start with a study, that's perfect.
I
Let's see.
don't see it. If it doesn't work, you can send it to me.
Oh, it's here.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Can I? Yeah. Good. Can we? Yes. Perfect. So basically, as you said, CoRisk, together with Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, with scientists from Statistics Norway, and with one colonel from the Norwegian War Academy, we set out 9 months ago to make a scenario report on how could various scenarios for the war in Ukraine be realized, and basically what would it cost to Europe. The reason we did that is that we saw that Western support of Ukraine when it comes to both civilian, but of course crucially military support, was quite kind of deficient. It doesn't really, the current level of support means in reality that Russia is grinding its way very slowly, but still advancing gradually, and will eventually be able to push towards the Dnieper River and force a peace settlements on Russian terms if Ukraine's current military resources are as they are. So basically, the status quo is that basically Russia is winning slowly, but winning. So what we looked at is scenario 1. What will it mean if Russia wins? Basically, if it succeeds in pushing and basically enforcing a peace settlement on Ukraine, which clearly benefits Russian interests, meaning Ukraine will be a failed state. They will be dependent on Russia for energy. Russian oligarchs and companies will dominate much of their economy. They will never be able to enter the EU or NATO. They will not be allowed to have a big army, etc., etc., etc. And of course, these may again open for even more later on Russian aggression to basically annex all of Ukraine, or at least a very big part of it. And then we looked at the scenario 2, basically the alternative. The English version of this report will be launched probably tomorrow. You can see it draft on the left. Europe's Choice, we call it. But it's basically about attaching economic and military estimates to these 2 scenarios. So we ask ourselves, what will it take for Ukraine to gain the upper hand in military terms as they had in 2022 and even parts of 2023? You have to remember that in 2022, Ukraine retook large occupied areas from Russia because they had enough equipment and they had clearly more support from Western countries than they do today. So basically, we used a renowned military resource model, the Dupuy model, to estimate the balance of power and how to rebalance combat power in Ukraine's Ukraine's advance. We use trade data, customs data, and OSINT research to estimate Russia's future armament level, the state of Russian economy, the state of Russian military production, and we basically estimated the costs to Europe, and taking as a starting point that Europe will have to fund basically all Ukraine's needs of external support. We think the United States will not yield any financial support in the future, and basically Europe will have to cover basically everything. If we start by scenario 2, the green scenario here, it will basically cost Europe over 4 years upward to maybe as much as 840 billion euros, meaning like 200 billion a year, which is four times as much as Europe donates to Russia today. So basically, you will quadruple Europe's cost if you want to allow Ukrainian military supremacy and kind of victory. And by victory means that they turn the tide and Russia changes the calculus, and we get a probable peace agreement where basic interests of Ukraine are safeguarded.
Can I ask?
Yes.
This scenario basically is the maximalist goal of Ukraine to retake occupied land. Is it including Crimea and all of the LNR and DNR previously occupied territories from 2014?
So what we think is that in the same way as Russia doesn't have to take all of Ukraine to make Ukraine a failed state, in the same way Ukraine doesn't have to reconquer all the occupied areas to make Russia change the calculus. So once Ukraine kind of gains the upper hand and starts kind of doing what they did in 22 and partly summer 23, basically pushing Russia's forces backwards, we think that Putin will it will have a tremendous political effect in Russia, because unlike 22, everyone kind of the war is a much bigger thing in Russia now politically for the survival of the regime, and we think they will change the calculus so that they will basically fear a breakdown of their occupation, right? So kind of without what we've done, it's basically that within this Dupuy military resource model, we have basically modeled what would it take to give Ukraine a clearly superior so-called combat power. And that means to fully equip 96 army brigades and other balanced military supplies, full air defense and drones and everything. And it would have a cost upwards to 850 billion euros. So the alternative, if we don't do this, or if for other reasons Russia basically wins, it means they keep taking more and more land, maybe a bit more rapidly than they're doing today. And Ukraine clearly have to sue for peace because they see that they will basically really lose the war and fear full occupation. We have estimated that this will have a total cost for Europe of upward to 1,630 billion euros. It means double the cost as scenario 2. So if you want to make Ukraine win, you will quadruple your cost. But if you don't, you will double that cost again. That is the basic, these are the basic results when it comes to the estimations that we did together with an economist from Statistics Norway. And you can see below how much money is this actually. If you look at today's, in the bottom here, the gray a little circle Europe's support to Ukraine today, which is about 40-50 billion euros a year. That is approximately 0.2% of Europe's GDP. If you look at supporting Ukrainian victory, clearly superior combat power, that will cost Europe 0.9% of European GDP, while a Russian victory would cost 1.8% of GDP. And the cost elements here in a Russian victory is, first of all, of course, 6 to 10 million new Ukrainian refugees searching for Europe. That would cost almost, at a maximum, with 11 million refugees, that would almost cost 1,000 billion euros. And then we have needs of more rapidly strengthening Europe's defense, 256 billion euros. And then we have, of course, continued military support to Ukraine. The residual Ukraine, so to say, will have to be supported even more than today in order to avoid, after a kind of peace settlement beneficial to Russia, a part of Ukraine will still exist in some form, and that country will need even more military support than today. So compare this with some other costs of Europe. We can look at the pandemic spending in 2020, which cost that year 2% of Europe's GDP. This is for the Eurozone, that's to say. And if you look at the bailout packages to Greece and to other countries after the Great Recession of 2009, the financial crisis, the Eurozone spent each year over 4 years, it spent around 3.2% of GDP, which is basically 3 to 4 times as much as it would cost to let Ukraine win. So that's the main estimations and results. It's a very long report. It's almost 100 pages. Lots of detail, lot of data, lot of kind of military listing of kind of military equipment and analysis behind that from experts at the War Academy. And it basically lays out, let's say, an alternative path compared to what we saw now in this US peace proposal that was presented a few days ago. So if we, questions.
Yeah, I obviously have a question about, or lots of questions, but I've a question about the worst outcome scenario, which I think it could be even worse than this, right? You mentioned that a scenario where Ukraine is basically split and Europe is continuing its support to what remains of free Ukraine. But have you looked any at scenarios which are even worse than that, where other nations in Europe may be attacked or their integrity is disputed, and we actually have to start preparing for direct war with Russia?
Yeah, so basically scenario one, good question. Scenario one, the defense element, the defense cost element in scenario one, a cost of more than 250 billion euros, is an accelerated buildup of defense lines in the Baltic states, Finland and Norway, basically the eastern border. So what that means is that is the cost of more rapidly than already planned building up a credible deterring defense. Basically, you have to increase standing military army forces in the Baltics from today's 48,000 up to 120,000 or more. And then that is kind of just the price of deterring a Russian attack. If such an attack should happen, let's say there was a German author who just issued a book on what if Russia wins, and he predicts that maybe Russia would try to a little skirmish, a little attempt of testing NATO in Estonia or something. But in any way, if there is actually warfare between Europe and Russia, the cost of that is astronomical. You may kind of think that these costs are already astronomical. Refugee cost, building defense, and supporting what is left of Ukraine if Russia wins is a cost of about 400 billion euros a year, which is about 2% of, almost 2% of Europe's GDP. But if there is actually warfare, the cost of warfare is much, much, much higher. It's astronomical. We are talking about maybe 100 billion euros or more per month. So this is kind of the deterrence cost. But as you see, the biggest cost element is the refugee cost, actually. And in scenario 2, so it may be that scenario 1 is Russian victory actually will be a little bit more expensive. It probably is. But scenario 2 may also be a little bit less expensive because in the study, we think that only quite a few, if Ukraine kind of wins in the way that it secures a peace deal that safeguards some of their interests, we think that quite few Ukrainian refugees in Europe will return to Ukraine. And the reason why we think that is that many of them are from Donbass and Crimea, and those areas will probably still be occupied by Russia, at least a lot of. So they basically cannot return. But we saw recently that the EU, the European Union, actually wants to advise countries to return many Ukrainian refugees after 2029, I think, or 27, anyway. So there's a kind of momentum for return, which means that basically Europe may expel more Ukrainian refugees, and scenario 2 then will be even kind of lower cost, even cheaper for Europe.
Yeah, you estimate
not for the good reasons, but this is on the table from the Commission.
Interesting. So you estimate about around 6 to 11 million additional refugees could arrive. How do you reach those numbers, and do you have any thoughts about what the political consequences could be? Because those are, not easily calculated in monetary value.
So today, about 6 million Ukrainians have fled from Donbass and Crimea, first of all, or actually more. But 6 million have fled the country, but an additional some millions are, of course, internally displaced. So they have fled, but to other places in Ukraine. Where do we arrive at between 6 and 11 million? Basically, it's based on Russia pushing towards the Dnipro River, the Dnipro. That means that they will take all the way to Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk, and probably large part of Kharkiv and Sumy Oblast as well. So basically, it's based on population and on the migration response that we saw with the first conquest, basically, of Donbass and Kherson and Crimea Oblast. So that is quite simple calculus. So I think it's not very easy to say exactly how many will flee the country and how many will only, let's say, flee to Kyiv or to Lviv or some other part. But that is based on population density.
Yeah, understood. We mentioned actually last Sunday that the situation in southeast of Ukraine, where the Russians have somewhat accelerated their advance, is pretty scary when you look on the map, because if the progress continues the next year, there is a real risk that the city of Dnipro will also be impacted much more directly, and it's a huge population within the urban area of Dnipro, and of course also Zaporizhzhia, which is even closer. So yeah, those are really scary. It's a really scary outlook just to look on the map today, to be honest.
Yes. So this report, of course, aroused a lot of debate in Norway, but it was only Norwegian. So now with this English language version, we hope to raise some new discussion in Europe as well.
Yeah. Did you get any specific response from politicians and also maybe some military leaders about this? I think that's interesting.
It's very interesting that when it comes to the report itself, basically proposing that Norway should, first of all, double its defense spending and double its support of Ukraine, double everything. The report was posted on LinkedIn by the Chief of Norwegian Defense, the commanding general. So maybe it speaks a bit about kind of the message being kind of, if not endorsed, so at least a rising interest in the highest military circles. And of course, we are presenting this in Parliament and elsewhere, and TV, news, etc. So the hope is that we will kind of awake some of the, should we say, sleepwalking of European leaders. Yesterday, Norway basically responded to Ukraine's needs by giving another $1 billion. So we raised this year's support for Ukraine to $10 billion, which I think is more than any other country this year. I don't know if anyone donate more, maybe Germany. But it's so this continuous pressure is having an effect in Norway. We'll see about Europe. That's a bit more difficult to impact on. But I think it's a quite solid report. It has, of course, all reports is based on, of course, assumptions, etc. Like all exercise as this would be. But we think it's quite worked through and it's quite thorough. So you should have a look when you will find it at nupi.no and corisk.no. You will find it at ResearchGate and many other places. So.
Yeah, we will definitely link the report in English. I've already linked it in the video description for the Norwegians that, or maybe some of our Scandinavian friends may be able to read it. But if it's already posted tomorrow, we will, of course, update the description and post the link on our social media, because I think this is very interesting and you know, we've heard people say this kind of probably putting a finger in the air and saying, yeah, this is gonna cost at least double as much, but backing it up with a report like this is very important if you want to actually convince decision makers. So yeah, thank you. And then if you want to mention anything more about the report, or maybe if Joseph, you have any more question about the report, then we can continue on the report. But I guess Erlend also has another topic.
I think it's a really clear report. It's good to see some real numbers being thrown at this, and yeah, as you said, I think that's what it'll take to convince policymakers. So, yeah, good job on the report, Norway.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you didn't just work on this the last 4 years, I assume. You've been up to some other stuff as well.
Yeah, this report we have worked 8 to 9 months on it. So and the English, we are finishing the English version tonight probably, so we'll probably release it tomorrow. And it takes, yeah, it's time demanding. I mean, it's bottom up instead of just kind of put a finger in the air and take some number. we have kind of meticulously estimated the cost of everything that they basically will need on the battlefield. And that is, it's substantial work, but it's also rewarding.
Yeah. Do you have any specific topics or moments in writing this report that you want to highlight as maybe more difficult or rewarding when actually accomplishing it?
I mean, the estimations of military needs are very detailed and they're based on Norwegian military army planning models. But I think the most difficult to estimate was the humanitarian cost and the increase in refugees. That is kind of very difficult to predict. But we also did some very interesting work on estimating, of course, the future armament military production capacity of Russia. We made estimations of Russia's economic growth, which we think has been negative since 2021. We think there has not been one single year of economic growth in Russia since 2021. And there are several pages to substantiate that. We think that the inflation of Russia is substantially higher than the official, maybe double or even more. So that is kind of one of the foundations, which is, which can also win some headlines as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We can go to the next slide if you want.
Is that... Yes. Yeah, sanction evasion research. So when the war started, I started work on data the day after Russia's second attack on Ukraine, basically February 2022. I spent the whole summer of 2022 digging data and building some economic models, databases, and some econometric models, which after half a year enabled us to say something which not so many were able to substantiate, namely the magnitude of shadow trade and the actual first the actual Western trade with Russia, and then we have expanded this to basically track every month Russia's trade with 175 countries in the world, basically all of the world, covering 99.8% of Russia's trade. And what we're doing by this, we are looking at, of course, direct trade, but then we are also tracking shadow trade, or let's say sanction evasion. And because we have, so we are tracking every month most Western countries and 13 intermediaries, all the ex-Soviet republics, Turkey, Emirates, and partly China and Hong Kong. That's very difficult. It's worth a seminar in itself. So basically, we have, by doing this, we have issued lots and lots of reports, 12 reports, I think, on this issue. Also together with B4 Ukraine, which is an advocacy group in London, consisting of many NGOs, but also many OSINT researchers across Europe. And we've been working closely with the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, which is a very big network in the ex-Soviet area. So as a sanction hunter, so basically we've done two things. That which has gained us most access to politicians is the macro work, and you can see this big graphic here in the bottom right of this slide. You'll basically see the blue color. This is starting in January 2019, and this goes all the way up to July 2025. You can see the little battle tank. That is Russia's second attack on Ukraine in February 22. So you can basically see this is Western countries' export to Russia before that, little battle tank, which marks the attack on Ukraine, or the full scale. And then you can see how direct exports to Russia really fell to the not to the bottom, but it was cut in half. And today, Western direct exports to Russia are a third of what they normally would be, about $4 billion a month, whereas normally it will be around $12 billion a month before the main sanctions were enacted. But then you see here in the dark violet color, you will see how these Western countries evade sanctions by shipping goods via intermediaries to Russia. And then you have, even on top of that, you have some goods going via China. Not as much, actually, via China as many would presume. So the Chinese export to Russia is mainly Chinese goods. When it says China here, it basically means China and Hong Kong. I want to mention that. They are mainly exporting Chinese goods, but that could also be Chinese goods produced by, for example, an American company in China, like the iPhone, for example. So the iPhone is by far, China's biggest export to Russia. The iPhone alone, it's not more than half the export, but China has, over the last 3 years, they have exported iPhones to Russia worth like between $5 and $10 billion. That's a big item. But of course, they are also exporting lots of goods made in China, but that is not kind of part of this. The little red space here in this graph is only Western goods from going from Western countries and then to China and then to Russia. So how do we track all of this? We use, of course, Western trade data, of course, but to find out what actually goes from intermediaries to Russia, we validate that with Russian customs data. We had monthly access to Russian customs data. And then we look at intermediary countries' exports to Russia, and some of them have quite detailed export data, like India, like Georgia, like many others. So we managed to estimate this, and this is quite exact. We have done many testings. We have tested these data against each other. We have triangulated and validated. We have tested Western data from the model against Russian customs data. And what it also reveals, quite interestingly, if you go to Bank of Russia and look at in the balance of payment statistics, they have actually one item which is imports and exports of goods. So they have their own, they are revealing monthly their own trade, but only on the macro, only the total trade and nothing granular. But actually that trade measure is actually totally correct. So that's interesting. It's clearly correct. So they are neither hiding nor exaggerating their total external trade in goods. So we are working on the research level. We are working a lot with Stockholm School of Economics, also on validating and methodology, and basically discussing how to get these data better and better. So together with Stockholm School of Economics, we are launching a portal called sanctionsrussia.org. You will eventually find much more there, because apart from this macro picture that you see here, we are also going to break that down into sanction goods, war relevant goods, war critical goods, etc. So when it comes to sanction hunt, you'll see in the lower left part of the slides, you will see just a little bit of the media exposure. And the media exposure basically is part of another pillar in our work, which is the result of sanction hunting, basically going after companies. And we have, with media, we have nailed many companies: Mercedes-Benz, BASF, SKF in Sweden. We had a big sequence of media exposure in Sweden on SKF. They're making ball bearings. They invented the ball bearing in the 1800s. They are making things that Russia totally needs for the war and which almost no one else can make. And this had a big effect in Sweden, involving the prime minister and parliament and police investigation and everything. So actually we released that in late September when I was myself in Kyiv. It was during the second biggest attack on Kyiv. But what the Swedish newspaper revealed was a video of a Ukrainian officer who opened a Russian drone and picked out the Swedish ball bearings from the drone. So this had big effect. We have exposed military companies in Sweden, air part providers, lot of OSINT work together with others, and on our own. We worked with Financial Times, Der Spiegel, Frankfurt Allgemeine, lots and lots of stories, and many other media. And then we also acted as expert, given expert testimony to the EU Commission. The sanction teams of all European countries worked a lot with the German team, the Polish team, Finnish team, increasingly with the Norwegian and Swedish teams. We have presented findings, US Congress, etc. And I think the biggest process we were deeply involved in was the closing of the Belarus gap, basically convincing Baltic states, Finland, and Poland of totally closing their borders for trade via Belarus, which was quite big at the time. Yeah, here you can see the sanctions Russia. You can see us, the team in the middle, up higher middle, Tobin Becker, who is Professor Becker is a part of the Yermak Fall group, head of the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics, basically the Eastern Europe Institute at the Stockholm School of Economics, and myself and many other very good researchers here.
Yeah, since you mentioned the website, I thought maybe we should bring it up. It's sanctionrussia.org.
Yes, I think that's about a good start.
Yeah. I have several questions about sanctions that I've gathered from our team. As you came into the stream, Stanimir was finishing up his report. He had to go, unfortunately, but he gave me some questions. And what I think, first of all, I just want to ask plainly: are the sanctions working, and could they be working better? And how can we make sure that they will work better?
Yes, they are clearly working. It seems a bit odd to say that they're clearly working because Russia continues the warfare. But they work. They have reduced Russia's export revenues a lot by cutting away most of Europe's purchase of gas, even though we're still buying too much oil and gas from Russia. You have to remember, Russia has really seen their gas and oil revenues from Europe being slashed. And recently we see even much more from October last year, and especially actually over the last months, we have seen the oil sanctions really being tightened. It's helped a bit sanctioning all these individual shadow fleet tankers. But what has really helped even more now is, of course, the sanctions of Lukoil and Rosneft, but also much higher pressure on India in many ways. And this is also doesn't only come from regulation, But the problem with shadow tanks is that they are probably not really insured. And if there is oil spill on the west coast of India, it will cost them hundreds and hundreds of billions, which the tankers owners will not be able to cover. So basically, there is a increasing reluctance to receive oil and gas. So that's on one hand. But when it comes to Western goods and wartime technology and war critical goods entering Russia, in the start, and still some journalists are pushing a lot of stories about all the goods that enter Russia, that they find a way. And I've been doing that myself for 3 years. So that is a true story. But Russia's supply of war critical, absolutely vital goods is declining a lot. And we can say a lot. Take one example, things they need for producing tanks and artillery, battle tanks and artillery, refined chromium, other substances, engine parts, very advanced tools and all of that. It's going down, down, down. It's just going one way. It's going down.
Yeah.
And yeah, so basically, and this is hampering their military production. It seems quite clear that their military production is being hampered. Of course, if you look at Germany 1944 or Yugoslavia 1994 or whenever, you see that even though their economies were more or less wrecked, hyperinflation, in Germany's case, bombed cities almost turned into rubble, economy, of course, totally broken. The armies keep fighting in spite of a wrecked economy. So one of the last things that happen is actually their armies stop fighting, but the supplies the armies have their ability to fight via logistics, supplies, and all of that. It will be just kind of slowly going down and down, and I think we are partly see that, but you'll not necessarily see it on the battlefield. The main impact you will see in the civilian life of Russia, as you saw in Germany. Basically, people start not getting the goods they need. We see that in agriculture in Russia. We see that now with long queues to have petrol and diesel. And you will see that in many areas. But first of all, of course, the slashing of export revenue, which has been harsh. Russia has lost 30-40% of their exports. That's a lot.
Yeah, so you came in front of my question here. I wanted to ask if it's actually degrading Russia's ability to produce missiles and other war material. But I guess it is. But why can they still pump out all these missiles? Do you know?
Yeah. So basically, this is here. I think Russia's production is it's a result both of the economic situation or their supply situation, but also, of course, a result of their military strategy and disposition. So, for example, we estimate in the NUPE report, which I just presented in the first part of this session, we estimated they will almost stop producing artillery and battle tanks. It will more or less stop. It will go down to, I think it was like 10, 12 battle tanks a month, something like that. And they will not be even anywhere near of replacing. So they have basically lost their cavalry, their armored, mechanized capabilities. They still have more artillery than Ukraine, and that's not because they have a lot of artillery, but it's because Ukraine have very little artillery. But they are prioritizing missiles and drones. And why are they doing that? Because they see that they are not able to make much progress on the front line with mechanized, armored, battle tanks, etc. those weapons are more or less useless. So they are basically now prioritizing to terrorize the civilian Ukrainian population. That is that has turned into the key military tactics, and of course it works in the sense that people are after all tired. They are hit by war. There is less electricity, etc. But you see that in Russia as well. Now that Ukraine has started kind of hitting back on electricity, on petrol and diesel, all of that. But basically, their military production is probably severely hit on the artillery and cavalry and battletech side. Everything mechanical, but they are giving high priority to missiles. Yes, that is probably what they're producing, drones and missiles.
Do you think that's a direct consequence of also the sanctions, or?
Yes, there are some things that they cannot get. For example, to produce artillery and cavalry, they will need refined chromium and some other refined rare metals, which they are not able to refine themselves. And we see that their imports of this has been diminished a lot. And we saw last week that the main battle tank producer in Russia, which is called Ural Vagon Zavod, this company started, they laid off 10% of their staff, started to scale down production. And according to some resources, this may be because they lack the input goods that they need for the battle tank production, and especially the gun barrels. So that is kind of we think this is the situation. Nobody really knows, as you know yourself, when you're doing research in Russia, you cannot really know. You don't know if there is this very hidden stream of refined chromium from somewhere in China via the mountains and some almost smuggling or something. But when you put together the pieces and you look at sources inside Russia and etc., then you can kind of try at least to puzzle the picture, and we think there is a substantial first of all lack of input goods from imports. But of course, as I told you before, sanction usually don't topple a regime. They usually don't kind of topple a dictator. And the second is that sanctions will not make the army stop fighting, but it will reduce their ability. But of course, and I mean, we have seen that already. We have to remember that Ukraine, which 5 years ago, which was a country with hardly an army at all, this country has, after all, stopped the second biggest army of the world from occupying them fully, and even pushed back substantially in 2022. So Russian military is hampered and reduced. Capabilities are reduced, but of course, so are the Ukrainian. The Ukrainian, they lack a lot of equipment. And that is basically what's in the scenario too. And that's why we when we look at what they would need, equipping 96 full army brigades, it will cost like 4 times as much as we support them with today. So they also have a very long way to go. But sanctions are working, definitely.
Good to hear. I have some specific questions about sanctions from our previous speaker, Stanimir. And I'll just shoot some of them out. So one was a question that he said he couldn't answer, that he was posed. And it's Russia didn't start bidding on grain contracts until October, November. Have you seen any indication that this may be linked to some attempt to hide their actual exports through other means, or sell grain?
No, sorry, but no. So we have not gone a lot into oil, and much less even into kind of agricultural. So of course, we would wish to go into the grain trade because it's super important and a lot of criminal activity involved in it. Basically, also stealing Ukrainian grain. But no,
Yeah.
sorry, we have never looked at the grain trade in any detail.
Okay, I'll try with the next one then. It's about airlines, airliners. Do you have any good information about the airliner fleet in Russia?
I mean, we worked with Financial Times on Siberia 7, which is I think it's called Siberia 7, is an airline and their suppliers. We worked a lot with them and Bloomberg on airline part supplies. Our clear impression, this is only our impression, our clear impression is that airlines are substantially struggling with parts and with security and with operational activity. So is the railway. Kyiv School of Economics have quite good research on done quite good research on railway traffic. But our clear impression is that road traffic, basically trucks, have taken over much of the tonnage and the capacity and the transport that was previously performed by air and railroad. Basically, you can see that in the continued increase in imports of trucks and truck parts. So that's one of the few things that Russia import more of, which has not been reduced, despite falling revenues to pay with. They are importing more than ever trucks and truck parts, and that's and you can see, for example, the salaries for truck drivers in Russia have exploded. I think they've been more than doubled. It's hard to get enough drivers, enough trucks. So we have a clear impression that road traffic has taken over from other modalities based on big problems with spare parts, also for railroads.
Have you seen any attempts to replace Russian airliners' Western airplane parts and engines through sanction busting, apart from one attempt that was revealed about servicing in Ethiopia?
Yeah, but I mean, they have. It's funny about aircraft parts. They are trying to buy that from everywhere: Oman, Maldives, everywhere. But the most you have to remember that in 2022 they confiscated lots of Western aircraft in Russia. They basically took all Western airlines from countries they disliked, and basically expropriated all aircraft currently in Russia owned by them. And in that way, they got some spare. Of course, they have some spare parts they can take from. They basically take spare parts from existing airplanes. That's one thing. So kind of cannibalism, but they also probably copied a bit and tried to produce parts themselves. There was this. Actually, I commented on an Al Jazeera report half a year ago, or maybe 4 months ago, where they have a reportage from Russia about an aircraft which was allegedly fully produced by Russian parts. So the first aircraft in the world, newly produced, it was called something 101. I don't remember exactly the name of the aircraft, but allegedly every single part inside it was Russian. That ended up to not be fully true. There were some French parts in there, but that is probably the only way they can go, trying to kind of substitute former imports. And that has been a strategy under Putin, of course, because he knew, of course, with sanctions that the flow of import supplies would decline. But import substitution has had very limited effect, success in Russia. Very limited success, and there are lots and lots of goods that they are not simply able to produce them. And go back to chromium, which you need inside all gun barrels. You needed to produce artillery or battle tanks, they are the biggest producer of raw chromium in the world, 2 million tons, but they are not able to refine it. And it's funny, this huge industrial country not being able to refine chromium up to the 99 point, I think 6 or something percent purity that you need. It's astonishing, but they just aren't able to do a lot of high-tech things.
Yeah, interesting. I have another question from Stanimir. There is official news that Chinese and Indian refineries have reduced their input of Russian oil in the last few months. Have there been any deliveries over the last few weeks that were not accounted for, that you have noticed?
No, Korea in Finland, they follow this much better. We are not like, we don't have access to Kepler and all these data. So when we use Russian customs data, they are at a half a year delay. So anything kind of last week or last month or something is very, we don't know anything more than others. But it's quite clear that Indian imports of Russian oil is under pressure from many sides. One is the sanction of the shadow tankers, which imposes a certain risk of just receiving as a port state, or receiving the tankers. Then you have the no exposed lack of real insurance of the tankers, which means that if there is a huge oil spill, let's say on the west coast, this refinery is on the west coast. Let's say you have all of Mumbai floated with, I mean, how much is it? 200,000 tons of oil, something like that. It would cost billions and billions and billions, and the ship owner would not in any way even be near of covering it. So that's the second. The third, of course, now sanctioning of Lukoil and Rosneft. And the fourth, the risk of any kind of weird tariff or anything from the US, which today is totally unpredictable, also for India. So we think, they've been under pressure for a long time. They have, at time, for example, they have denied tankers to port, and then they have let them in, and then it's a bit back and forth. We know of shadow tankers who have been afloat, adrift outside India for a week at a time. Lots of uncertainty imposed on them, and this is kind of, this is one of the points, this is one of the areas where Europe has leverage. So let's say United States stopped oil, they abandoned all oil sanctions tomorrow. Europe would still have a lot of leverage over the oil sanctions, because European countries basically provide the insurance that you, as a tanker, would need to insure against oil spills. And we set the price cap, and this has a lot of leverage over the whole global industry, actually. Yeah,
thank you. I think that was a very good answer, even if you said you don't have any data on it.
So we have our focus area has been kind of Western or exports to Russia. We have kind of focused a lot on technologies flowing into Russia, but we have also kept up to date with the oil sanctions. We have taken part every year in the G7 Plus sanction expert seminar in Warsaw, which is quite high level. Craig Kennedy and all these other kind of big shots from Harvard and elsewhere. And it's very interesting to follow the oil sanctions, because it's a bit a disagreement as to how much effect they have. But I think this is one of the areas where, even without help from or support from the United States, those sanctions could have quite a lot of effect nevertheless.
I have a question, since I know that you have a lot of companies in the West on your lists that have not necessarily done their due diligence with regards to following the sanctions. Do you have any examples, or let's say some of the worst examples that you want to talk about, because I think that is very interesting.
I mean, a lot of this has been in the media. We have helped media with exposing about 60 companies, 60. Many German, some US, but mostly Scandinavian and German. And of course, the providers of trucks, they are really on the wrong side of history, because, and you can find them easily if you go to avito.ru. Avito is the C2C and B2C sales platform in Russia, where you can sell things to your neighbor or whatever. Avito have a very big department for cars and trucks, online classifieds, and you will find all these brand new Swedish and German trucks there, in their hundreds, if not in their thousands. And you can see all the proof you need that these trucks are still being supplied to Russia in plentiful numbers, and they play a very important part in the war, because with the probable breakdown in air traffic and reduction in rail traffic, trucks are very, very important. So all these producers like Daimler-Benz, Scania, Volvo, MAN, etc., DF, these companies, unintentionally or not, being aware of it or not, these companies are really, really helping Russia in the war.
How can
Other
they?
companies, Caterpillar in US, extremely important. So Caterpillar, they hardly produce anything that's not sanctioned. Of their total export to Russia, export of their goods, 96% of it is sanctioned. They make they make some minor products that are not sanctioned. So you can basically take as a start that everything they make, and they are exporting to Russia in tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars a year, and it's these goods also are extremely important to Russia. For example, in the construction of defense lines along the front line.
So what can these companies do better? Obviously, things are arriving. How can they stop it?
Yeah, so basically, the first thing they have to do, they have to get control of their sales departments. They have to let compliance, if they have a compliance unit, most of them have. I've spoken to many of them. For example, we helped German media exposing Infineon, which is a huge German component and digital component producer. And they had some compliance people. They called me and wanted to kind of have a dialogue and stuff. But it helps very little if that compliance unit don't kind of reach down into the sales departments and the distributors. What they usually do is they sign a paper with the distributor. So they sell, let's say, trucks or digital components. They sell it to someone in Turkey who's dutifully signs a paper. I will never resell this good to Russia. And then the week after, the good is in Russia. So basically, you have to kind of penetrate down into your own company, and that requires resources. Even companies much, much, much smaller than Caterpillar or Infineon or Texas Instruments or what have you, much smaller companies I know of, whom I've been also advising or helping to boost their capabilities for compliance. They have employed, handfuls, if not tens of experts to work with the internal investigation and compliance. And you have to go all that way. You have to basically staff those functions to be not kind of some things you kind of brush with in the annual report, but actually have a saying and a reach and a penetration downwards and outwards across your corporate organization, and that is a big work. It basically demands that from the tone from the top, board and executive management basically have to decide and supply the resources needed that this is actually going to be cleaned up.
I'm thinking that it won't necessarily materialize on a wide scale unless the board and the directors of the company are personally responsible for this and also could be punished in case they don't comply, right?
Yeah, but that's punishment is a bit funny. So what we did actually, we looked at sanction evasion, and then we regressed that. We compare that with, for example, level of fees or imprisonment years you could get if you were caught, right? If you violate. So the punitiveness of the legal system, there was no connection with sanction evasion. So if it was like 10, 20 years prison as in the US, it still didn't curb the sanction evasion. I think one way to go is to basically have to do a lot of investigations like Finland have done. So Finland have investigated more than 900 now, maybe 1,000 companies. Norway has investigated maybe 50. So I think Finland has investigated maybe 20 times as many with the same population and the same size of economy. And what does this mean? It means that 20 times as many companies have had these kind of investigators on their neck, having to open the books, ask questions internally. I mean, if you get a down raid or you get an investigation, if it includes even a down raid, that is also an internal wake-up call inside your company. So I think that has a lot of psychological effect. And you can see, for example, Finland's shadow trade with Russia has disappeared, so to say disappeared. Whereas the Swedish and Norwegian shadow trade has not disappeared. There is a huge difference. So Finland have been successful, not only with closing borders, but they have inspected export much more. They are doing inspections in detail. I mean, physical inspections of exports to a level that, for example, Norway is not even close to. They have invested in investigation, but the same with a company also. A company has to invest in internal investigation and compliance in order to, if you really want to stop the shadow trade. Most companies basically don't care. The perpetrators that we see, I mean, we can see the goods flowing into Russia every month, and the companies behind, they are some of the biggest companies in the Western world. I mean, the biggest in each industry. They're all on the list, right? So their goods are still flowing into Russia, lower volumes, so imports going down, yes, but still too many war critical goods. Texas Instruments, Analog Devices, Infineon, you name it. And these companies, I think investigation is increasing maximum prison penalties doesn't seem to have much effect, for example. I think investigative and enforcement resources is important. And we see that also when we regress. When we compare, basically analyze and compare sanction evasion with other kind of characteristics of society, we see that strong enforcement is clearly correlated.
Yeah, that's very interesting perspective. I actually never heard this perspective before we had our talk earlier today. But yeah, I just wish all European countries were as serious about doing these investigations as Finland.
Look to Finland.
Yeah, let's everyone look to Finland on this, especially on the sanctions enforcement. Yeah. So we have some listener questions, and I know Joseph is ready to read some of them out.
Okay, yeah, Chad, if you have any questions, now is the time to fire them off. So our first question is from Just My Profile Name. It says, hi, Tochnyi, Erlend B, and viewers. Why are medical supplies not sanctioned? Lots of medical supplies are dual use. They can and do help the Russian army.
Yeah, actually, this is a good question. So, I mean, with experience from the sanction of Iraq and Iran and other countries, as you may recall, if you're old enough, that kind of people were starving and didn't get medicines, and this had a big outcry, and for good reason. So, humanitarian and medical supplies and also medical equipment is kind of not sanctioned, but there are many medical and chemical substances that have, as you say, dual use propensities. And many of these are actually sanctions, but not enough. But many of them actually are. There is, you have basically defined sanctions under the so-called HS or harmonized system classifications of commodities. But there is also a list called CAS, so-called CAS goods, and of course, then we also have the dual-use directive to the EU. But on the CAS list, there are lots and lots of quasi-medical or let's say chemical substances that are actually sanctioned. But this is a mixed picture. But I mean, you cannot. So some of the biggest trade today is actually pharmaceutical goods, right? And that I think that is I think there's no one who really want to start sanctioning general pharma and food and all of that. But it's tricky because there are still several substances not sanctioned, some very severe. For example, some byproducts of fertilizer industry which are not sanctioned. So there's a lot to go. Don't get me wrong. I have been a bit kind of optimistic when it comes to sanctions during this session, but don't get me wrong. There's a lot to do, a lot of tightening to do.
Thank you for the question and for the response. Next question is from Oimbubi. Question regarding sanctions. From your point of view, what was the sanction with the largest impact, both short and long term, and what made no or very little impact?
So the biggest impact is the dollar and euro sanction. The general, the financial sanctions, prohibitions against basically transacting with Russia with the dollar and euros. Of course, freezing the foreign assets of the Bank of Russia was also extremely important. Maybe I have to correct myself. That was done that was the most important thing, because it basically took all the saving money from the Bank of Russia. But by the second most important, by banning transactions in dollar and euros, has pushed Russia into a reciprocal barter situation. And that means, in plain words, that they can only import as much as they can export. Many countries have trade deficit, like the United States. No problem, because they can get credit and trade credit and loans and what have you. People can buy American Treasury bonds and we can loan them money. And that's what usually kind of how does export take place? Export takes place by the exporter giving the importer some goods, and then the exporter gives the importer the money to buy the goods with. You give them both the goods and you give them the money to pay with, but as a so-called export credit. And then after some short time, the importer basically pays back. So there's a double accounting on the external balance of the country. But all of this is impossible for Russia. So if they want to import something, let's say from something legal from Norway, fish, something that they actually are allowed to, or some food stuff, then they have to basically they have to have the money to buy. They cannot get trade credit. You cannot give them loans. So they basically means that their imports will be limited by the exports. And that's the main reason, one main reason why imports to Russia have declined a lot by, we don't really know how much because we don't know the inflation in Russia, but it has to decline with something like 15, 20, maybe up to 30%, it's a lot. And we think the main reason it has declined is that they cannot pay because they don't export enough. So the dollar/euro sanction have been probably very, very effective. A little impact, yes. So I think when it comes to sanctioning the oligarchs, the idea was to drive a wedge in between Putin and oligarchs. And Stephanie Baker of Bloomberg writes about this in her book, Punishing Putin, which I, by the way, have here. A very good book. What I think is clear that these sanctions, basically what one did was to try to freeze some of the assets of these oligarchs, take their yachts and so on, fine. But what has generally happened is that they have saved as much they can of their assets and they have returned it to Russia. And they have become more dependent on Putin and not less. So instead of driving a wedge in between Putin and the oligarchs, one have maybe, at least I will say diplomatically, one has not weakened Putin's grip on oligarchs by sanctioning them. Maybe on the contrary. Of course, some of these oligarchs are strategically important for the war, of course, so that is another issue. But many of these have they have been pushed back to Russia with their money, which has also gone partly into the state coffins. Putin have devised many ways to get hold of the little dollars that they bring back with them. And I don't think this has been very successful. Maybe there was no alternative, but this was, maybe didn't have the effect one thought it would.
Okay, next question. Are there any key areas of sanctions pressure we haven't yet implemented that give a realistic chance of implementation?
Oh, yes. I mean, there is one big elephant in the room, and it's the gas and oil that Europe still imports from Russia. And this is a big part of Russian export revenues. We are talking still almost 10% of their exports going to Europe, and a lot of gas. Last year, maybe 200 billion euros in oil and gas. This is basically imported. The gas is going to France and Belgium and Spain and so on in the form of LNG from the Amal LNG plant. This could be just stopped overnight because there is enough LNG in the world. You can get it from the US, you can get it from Norway, you can get it from Algeria or Qatar or whatever. And then you have the oil and gas pipeline exported from Russia to Turkey and Slovakia. That is very interesting because Russia, that could be stopped tomorrow. Hungary and Slovakia could get all the oil they need via the Adria pipeline from Italy. It could cover all their needs. So why are they importing it from Russia? And they are insisting on importing from Russia. So we don't know that exactly, but there is quite interesting when you look at Hungary's oil import from Russia and Slovakia, Slovakian oil import from Russia. They get a $10 discount on each barrel. So they buy raw oil, crude oil from Russia at 10% below market cost or market price, but they sell it as petrol and diesel on the pumps for more or less world market price or European market price. So that is a puzzle that you, Tochnyi, should join forces and dig into. There are some at Kyiv who are also already digging into it. But basically, this could be Putin's payment for political loyalty from Hungary and Slovakia. So, because think of it, if you buy oil at 10% discount and you sell it at the pump to consumers at full price, then you have a premium that you can keep in your pocket, which is billions. And that is maybe one of the biggest political fixes that Europe has to make to basically and to force Hungary and Slovakia into retrieving oil and gas from the European grid. There is enough, but without that price premium from the Russian supplier.
Yeah, wow. 10% over several years. It's not just per month.
$10 actually. It's 15% discount.
15% discount. That's going to amount to enormous amounts of money. And I think you're alluding to the fact that there's no real trace of where it's going, or is it?
They basically, yeah. So if you look at, for example, the annual report of the Hungarian oil company MOL, there are no traces of extraordinary profits there, because normally the Slovakian and Hungarian refiners like MOL, they should make a big profit, right? They buy oil well under market price and sell it at more or less full market price. So where the money going is, there has been a bit of mention of this case in the media, also with the help of researchers from Kyiv in Finland. But this is a vastly under-reported issue and under-investigated issue that certainly deserves much more attention than it receives.
Next question. Are there any major trends in middlemen supply processes for bypassing sanctions?
Yeah, so in September last year, the so-called Belarus gap was closed, meaning that all the European flow of sanctioned goods that went to Russia via Belarus, which was a lot, it totally stopped. Why did it take place up until September? Because something totally ridiculous in EU sanctions. Because the EU sanctioned 3,500 goods that you could not sell to Russia, but 3,000 of them you could legally sell to Belarus. So out of every 7 goods that were banned, they were illegal to sell to Russia, 6 of them could be legally sold to Belarus, which was totally not only ridiculous, but catastrophic, because customs officials in Poland and Lithuania were not allowed to stop this if the export papers had destination Belarus. It was basically illegal to sell them. And of course, you can imagine what happened when the goods got to Minsk. They were shipped, of course, more or less immediately to Moscow from there. So we managed to totally close that. The EU at last harmonized sanctions between Russia and Belarus. And what this has instigated is that the physical flow of goods, this was billions and billions of euros a year, that has shifted to the Bosporus. So all those goods, including from Northern Europe, that still flow into Russia, they go via Turkey. I mean, geographically via Turkey. The middleman can be Dubai, it could be Turkey, it could be Georgia, it could be Armenia, Azerbaijan, or even Kazakhstan. But physically, the goods flow via the Bosporus, most of them Istanbul, and then from there across the Black Sea or via by truck via the Caucasus. So that's been a big shift. The shift to the east, the shift away from the more direct route, and this has, of course, trebled Russia's import costs, shipping costs of imports. So basically, Russia today, the imports they pay 3 times as much in freight and so on for the imports, which is not only contributed to inflation, but basically means that they get less in real terms, in actual goods, they get even less import than import value data indicate. So this is also an important part of EU regulation, and it was a very welcome tightening of the regulation. But it means that Turkey and Emirates are comparatively more important, and of course, for Western countries, it's much more difficult to control goods going from Dubai to Russia. So it has a backside as well, but altogether, a very good positive effect of the sanctions.
Yeah, I guess this is a question. How many brigades does Ukraine currently have?
Yeah, we have this in our report. I think they have, on paper, they have 100, but their brigades are smaller than a NATO brigade. So a NATO brigade will have like 5,000 soldiers. A Ukrainian brigade will have on paper like 3,000. So 100 brigades should be like 300,000 soldiers, but many of these brigades have less than 3,000. Some of them are starting to be quite thinly populated, partly because of losses in the war, but also lack of equipment. So what we estimate in our in the NUP report, the previous part of this presentation is that they need to fully equip, and then we mean really fully equip 96 brigades, including a bit more artillery and missile brigades that they have today. And we think this is needed to really to enhance the combat power of the. So I have friends in the brigades, both in independent, and you have this system of independent brigades. They are in addition, like the Azov brigade. You have Svoboda, you have Da Vinci Wolves, and many others who are independent. Means that they are not under the corps, the formal corps organization. They are not kind of directed by some general. They are working a bit more on their own. And some of them have much better equipment than the normal brigades, but the normal army brigades, infantry and artillery and so on, the 100, they are quite thinly. At some places they are struggling with manpower and so on, and you can see that, of course, on the battlefield. But it's the same on the Russian side as well. We have to. It's easy to be kind of a bit depressed by the state of Ukrainian defense. On many sections on the front, there are quite few Ukrainian soldiers. The drones are compensating for that, but it's the same side. It's the same on the Russian side. So you can walk into Belgorod County, perhaps in the night in the fog without seeing any resistance, right? So it's not kind of very much better on the other side. But altogether, Russia has more soldiers. They have clearly more soldiers. They have maybe 2 to 5 times as many soldiers on any given sector of the front line. And they have a bit more of missile power and artillery power. So they are grinding. They're grinding slowly, and advancing slowly. And of course, we have seen that now over last year, 2 years actually.
I want to add to the question from John. So, in your report, what kind of calculus did you use in the balance between logistical support and other support functions needed versus combat forces? Because the classical sort of NATO standard is that you need 2/3 for logistics and support functions, and 1 part for your frontline units or / combat forces.
Yeah, you mean manpower? Yes.
Yeah.
Or actually, let's say if you have a front line or a sector of front line where you have 100,000 soldiers, defenders, infantry mostly with some cavalry and artillery. Then you will need double that. You will need 200,000 soldiers in reserves if you're really going to keep up more or less full staffing of your brigades. You will have double as many reserves as you have soldiers or in the first line of contact. Because especially infantry, they take a lot of loss. Now, this calculus is a bit different in Ukraine, but this is the kind of calculus we applied for NATO, for the Baltics and Finland and so on. That the defender will need almost as many soldiers as the attacker, and plentiful reserves. And then, of course, we also calculated building defense lines, logistics, supplies, cars, trucks, all of that. So that is kind of probably, hopefully, taken care of. When it comes to Ukraine's brigades, we used a mixture of bottom-up cost estimations of the bottom-up materials that they would need, but we were also lucky enough to have the cost estimate model of some NATO countries to have access to those models, so we could basically apply that. So we can basically estimate Ukraine's need both bottom up and top down. So we did both, and the results were quite equal. They were quite similar, which means that we maybe hit quite well on the target, and estimating a need to boost Ukrainian defense with up to 800 billion euros in 1 or 2 years, and which is basically almost 5 to 10 times as much as they spend on military today. That's what you need to gain enough combat superiority to start pushing Russian soldiers back, which is much more demanding than just holding the line.
I brought this slide up that is from, I think I made it in January, February, when there was a lot of talk about a potential peace negotiation being forced when the Trump administration was coming in. And Zelensky said quite clearly, we need 100,000 Western troops in Ukraine to be reassured as a safety tripwire, and also, of course, as a security guarantee. And that's when you start to calculate our how we deploy soldiers. Then you understand how many personnel you need to actually fulfill such a mission. And it's a very easy calculation, and you get to 900,000 people, and then it's just astonishingly much. Did you also account for rotation in your calculus?
Yeah, so reserves or rotation, yes, basically on this scenario 1. So on the scenario 1, which basically is about boosting and accelerating defense of the Baltics, Finland, and Norway, basically Europe's eastern front with Russia, we took into account reserves, resting, training personnel. So basically, we trebled the front line, just like you'd actually do it in this model. So some of them resting, of course, will also, they don't kind of sleep for 6 months, right? They may work with logistics and other things as well. And of course, both in the Baltics and in Ukraine, there is quite a lot of logistics capacity already, needless to say. I think, or we think that, our military planners think that for Ukraine, the problem is not the soldiers, or you get the impression that the problem is actually the soldiers because they don't have enough people. But we have the impression that one reason that they don't have enough people on the front line is that they don't have enough equipment. So these are connected. There's a lack of weapons, right? Basically, they have very little artillery. They have very little armored and mechanized material left. And it's not so easy to just kind of staff up all of these brigades without kind of equipping them with better material than they have today. So it's basically the drone wall which kind of keeps the defense. There are large sections of the Ukrainian defense line where there are almost no soldiers, and also the Russians don't actually care so much about the first line soldiers. They attack much more like on the logistics and the drone operators and the support further behind the lines. That's a new development. You see that around Pokrovsk and other places, that there is quite a lot of. They basically don't. The frontline infantry doesn't play the same role as it does in normal military tactics in the textbooks, I would say. There is much more fight over the logistics and the supplies side of it, whereas the line of contact is more or less, at least large part of it, are protected by the drones.
Yeah. No, I just thought to bring this up because I think it's a very interesting dynamics that people may not think so much about when talking about a certain amount of numbers of soldiers on the front line.
Absolutely. And this, I mean, you can see this in Russia's import of trucks has increased 10 times, 900%. This is what we're talking about. So you can imagine this is partly because, of course, of destruction of trucks by Ukrainian missiles and artillery, of course, but it also speaks to the tremendous increased need of logistics in war. And if you look at, for example, the Baltics or Finland or other, the big problem for NATO will be to deploy and transport support troops and material to these areas, this theater of war, as the military call it. Because logistics will be both heavily attacked by missiles, but it's also underdeveloped. And I mean, if you have ever if you have seen the roads in Ukraine, I guess many of you have been there. I've been there several times, and driving roads of Ukraine. Yeah, they're not the best roads of Europe, and it's not because of the war; it's because of bad roads. So I mean, and that has a big impact, of course, on the magnitude of possible supplies. Right? Look at the roads between Poland and Ukraine, the main arteries. Yeah, they are not very big roads.
Yeah. You know,
the railway, but still, I mean, it's a this will be a big issue. I mean, getting all this material to, but we have to remember that Ukraine also has a big military industry themselves.
tactics win battles, but logistics wins wars, right?
Yeah.
That's a famous saying. So
Yeah.
I think we've gone through a hell of a lot of different topics and points, and you're just a fountain of information. So this went. I just looked at the time, and we've been here for more than 1.5 hours with you. So I think it's time to wrap up for now. But I really hope that we can have you back on sometime again, because this is so interesting, and I've really enjoyed having you on, Erlend.
Thank you, Alan.
Do you have any final?
The Ukrainian flag in the background there? You have the grain, the field, and you have the sky. So
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts?
no, I think this has been tremendous, and yeah, I mean, what we're seeing now from this so-called peace plan, etc. This is just rubbish. It will have no impact. The only impact it may have, it may be kind of some reason for Trump to step out of the whole thing. But the war will go on. I think the war and sanctions will go on for a long time. Sanctions for maybe 10 years. War for not 10 years, but unfortunately, I think the war will go on for all of 2026 and maybe into 2027, maybe longer.
Yeah. You see, Joseph, you were right. Everyone was panicking in our back channels about this peace proposal. Joseph immediately said, "You guys are overreacting. It's not going to change anything."
No. I mean, this is not the first time, and this is kind of what Trump comes up with. It's like, it's so, the diplomatic handicraft behind it is so bad. I mean, this guy Witkov, I don't know, he's a kind of real estate guy. He doesn't even bring he does all of the most basic mistakes that you learn, things you learn in first year as a candidate diplomat. He doesn't know anything about it. So the Russians are totally dictating the outcome of anything Trump is developing with those kind of people. But it just basically means that Europe will have to step up, and there is no other way. There is no other way than Ukraine and Europe together stepping up to the threat from Russia. There is no alternative, and the United States is, in this perspective, it's gone. It's as if, I mean, the United States kind of, we can buy some weapons from them, but apart from that, any kind of support from the US over the last 3 years, next 3 years under Trump, it's gone. And I think we just have to realize it, and we have to act on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Joseph, do you have any final words for closer?
Oh, no, I think, that's an accurate conclusion. I guess I'll just hop into the outro. Of course, thanks everyone in chat for attending and asking all the great questions. I hope the guests enjoyed them. Thank you, of course, to our distinguished guest, Erlend B. Not to be confused with our Erlend. Thanks, of course, to the panel today. Stanimir and Gao had to get out of here for work responsibilities and some other stuff, but they were able to come and do their segments, which was great. Hopefully we can get Stanimir in the same room with this guy next time, because I think they have a lot to talk about. And of course, thanks to Erlend for throwing the whole show together. And you guys can follow us on our website, Tochnyi.info. Erlend, you want to give our guest website one more time?
Yeah, so follow, of course, tomorrow on Korisk. Is it .no?
Yeah, we will launch it Korisk.no, exactly.
CORISK.
And nupi.no as well.
Yep. So the report in English is coming tomorrow, we hope.
Yeah, tomorrow or Tuesday. We just have to finally. I mean, what we're basically doing, we're just kind of taking in account of the last 1 day's development concerning the peace plan, of course.
Great.
So be patient, but no later than Tuesday.
Great. Yeah, we will link it.
Cool. Yeah. So check out the link to get that report no later than Tuesday. Thanks everyone on the back end of both teams that are doing all this research and sharing that with the public. I think it's really important that the public be well informed on all this stuff because, as this study points out, it could cost a lot of money otherwise. So thanks to our guests, thanks to our chat, thanks to everyone watching the video after the fact. And he's welcome back anytime, of course. I'm sure he knows that. And we'll see everyone next Sunday, 2100 Kyiv time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
On behalf of the brave.